Dean in California, you're on with Matt and Hector. How are you?
Mashallah, I'm on. Assalamu alaikum, Matt and Hector. I guess you could figure out what kind of theist I am based upon that. So essentially,
I'm gonna go with Zoroastrian. Am I wrong? Yes.
No. It's that thing where you face towards Mecca and stop listening.
Yeah.
No. You stop drinking booze, I guess.
I bet you don't eat bacon.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. How can we help?
People don't. Okay. So my main thesis here is that I want to argue that well-being is not a particularly robust or coherent form to base morality or ethics on. And first of all, I want to talk about coronavirus or something related to coronavirus. And we could all agree upon that coronavirus harms our well-being, irrespective of how we define well-being or whether we lack a good, robust theory or whether we lack philosophical theories of well-being, right? We could agree coronavirus, a COVID-19 infection would harm our well-being, right?
Well, yeah, generally speaking, all the information I have right now is that, yes, COVID-19 is directly in contradiction to an individual's well-being. But there's a bunch of different levels and aspects about well-being, including societal well-being. And when my well-being is in conflict with yours, how do we resolve those things? But go ahead.
That's what I kind of want to get into, I guess.
Yes, I'm aware.
And,
I've played this game once or twice.
And well, there's definitely a quote from, Matt's favorite philosopher and my favorite philosopher. And it is not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger. So essentially, the point there, said by our favorite philosopher, is that reason cannot establish. You cannot use reason to even prefer to save the entire world. Okay, so therefore, reason cannot in itself cannot be the source of moral motivation or how we sort of judge what necessarily is valuable.
Hang on.
And I think coming back to.
Hang on.
I think the thing coming back to. Okay, sorry.
That is about reason on its own. Reason,
yes,
with a goal of well-being is a completely different thing, because we can reason about there's not like if we had chess pieces in a board and no rules and no goal, we can't reason a winning move. But once there are rules and a goal, now we can reason for better moves and others. And so if we say the goal is well-being and we work on definitions related to well-being, then absolutely we can reason about the consequences of our actions with respect to that goal.
Yes, using evidential reasoning, you could sort of consequences of your actions to see whether it fulfills some sort of end, I guess. Sure. But the thing with, the example with like coronavirus, because I sort of remember like early on during the pandemic, I said to like a friend, like, I'm fine with the lockdown, but maybe in some point that there'll just be a point where I say screw it, and I just wish, because of the social isolation thing, and just hope everyone could just get out and cause, let's say, mass infections, and that would be enough to lead to sort of herd immunity. And of course, I think the point with well-being here is that, of course, having people not infected, we're not having people who are not preventing infection is conducive to well-being, right? But also socializing is also conducive to well-being. So the thing is,
hang on a second, Dean. So I thought we were going to have a conversation about whether or not well-being it serves as an actual decent foundation. Now, whether or not somebody thinks well-being is a good foundation for morality, I really don't care. I care about whether or not people care about well-being, not whether or not they count it as morality. Because if your morality isn't about well-being, I probably don't care about it, because I care about well-being. That aside, what you're talking about here is essentially a scenario where we're doing cost-benefit analysis, where we are saying, okay, we're going to wear masks, we're going to shelter in place, we're going to not have gatherings of more than 10 people, we're going to shut down non-essential industries, and we're doing it for this particular reason. And the reason that we're doing it right now is to make sure that we do not have an infection rate that is so high that it becomes something that the hospitals and the healthcare system cannot address. We are lowering that curve of infection or keeping it low enough so that we have the facilities to treat people and make sure this doesn't run away. Now, at some point, is it possible that the precautions that we're taking become more harmful? Is it possible for the cure to become more harmful to disease? Yes, that's absolutely possible. But in every discussion about that, we are always talking about well-being. So your examples or your concerns here of this cost-benefit analysis, the cost-benefit is still about well-being. So I don't know how you're going to get to some sort of objection to well-being just by talking about how are we doing the right thing with coronavirus now, and might that change?
Well, couldn't alternatively one have a passion to prefer socializing, like going to parties, and prefer that? Why should one
This isn't about, this isn't about preference. There are people who would prefer to kill everybody who disagrees with them. This isn't about personal preference. I'm talking about well-being. If you're not talking about the same thing, then we're just wasting time.
Well, yeah. So in the sense you are defining well-being in a particular cost benefit. So you're emphasizing certain things like avoiding infection, as opposed to, well, one person could also value, let's say, the freedom to socialize, and that's largely conducive to well-being too, because Hector Garcia is interested in psychology, and in the introduction of the show, there's an adverse effect to social distancing, I guess.
Sure, but are you equating the adverse effect, the psychological effect of social distancing, with, infection and possible death and from COVID-19? I mean, it's just a totally false equivalence. I mean,
I think most people would reasonably prefer to live instead of go on social distancing, but ultimately there is no. Ultimately it comes down to preferring living. Prefer avoiding the risk of getting infected than opposed to another form of well-being, which is largely just to maximize one's social interactions, I guess. But there's no reason to prefer one over the other.
Well, no. What you're basically arguing for, if somebody wants to maximize their social interactions, you might as well be arguing that somebody wants to maximize harm. I mean, just because somebody wants to maximize harm doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Just because somebody has an individual preference for something that isn't well-being, there may be people who care nothing at all about well-being. They have excluded themselves from the conversations about well-being. If I'm going to have a conversation about what's in our best interest, I must necessarily be having that conversation with someone else who actually cares about what's in our best interest, and not just what we might personally find preferable. That's what well-being addresses. It's not just, oh, I'm lonely. I wish I could socialize with people. Well, me too. I've been locked up since fucking March. I would love to go out. However, I recognize that this personal desire of mine for the sort of contact that makes my life better doesn't outweigh the risk of potentially blowing up the infection rate to the point where we kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions more. We're already at 200,000 Americans and nearly 1 million people worldwide.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah. Well, I think anything else, Matt and Hector?
Nope. Thanks.
Well.
Okay. I'm guessing that was the end, but they're off. So
the answer to that one seems pretty simple.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, okay, let me be clear. Maybe somebody can snip this on morality and well-being. I am in agreement largely with Sam Harris that the foundation that I would use for what we generally talk about as morality is something that we've identified as well-being. That's the language that Sam used. I had different language prior to that, but we were talking about the same thing and I preferred his. And so I've helped push it. That said, well-being is not, you can have legitimate objections to this line. You can say, well-being isn't morality. And my answer is, okay, that's fine. If you think morality is something else, my question then becomes, do you care about well-being? Because if you do, then we can still have a conversation about well-being, whether or not you consider it a moral or ethical foundation. Because I do care about well-being, whether or not you consider it a moral foundation. If you say that your moral foundation is from God or whatever, I don't care what a God thinks. I just don't. if that God has something to tell me about morality, he can come tell me himself rather than you telling me what you think God wants about morality. Because and at no point is that in any way demonstrated to be a foundation that's in our best interest. God doesn't have to have our best interests at heart. And if you say, well, I don't care about our best interests, cool. You've also excluded yourself from well-being, because well-being is about what's in our best interest. If you want to say well-being isn't well-defined, I would agree with you. But the fact that something isn't well-defined doesn't mean that it's not defined at all. It doesn't mean that we don't have a working definition and that we can't make sort of evaluations like, if I were to lop Hector's head off right now during the show, which would be almost miraculous since we're not in the same building even, that would definitely not be in his best interest. And it would probably not be in my best interest. And it would probably not be in society's best interest. And if you want to say that well-being is cumbersome because we have to look at individuals and groups and society and evaluate those well-beings and perhaps put them on balancing scales, I agree. There's a lot of hard work to be done. I'm sorry that you think morality has to be so simple and so beyond our reach that you would prefer to have it handed down from somebody else telling you what they think a God wants. But I care about well-being. But if you're just going to call in and say, what if somebody prefers something different? I have no response to that other than we're not talking about the same thing. But I'll bet you with every single person who thinks that they can just, oh, I don't care about well-being, I bet you they do. Because the people who genuinely don't care about well-being don't tend to stay alive. They don't care about their own interests enough to take the sort of action. Anybody who genuinely doesn't care about well-being, I either have nothing to say to them because they've excused themselves from the conversation, or I have nothing to say to them because they're dead.